Hello there, M&A Advisor community. This is Roger Aguinaldo, and welcome back to the M&A Advisor podcast. Since 1998, the M&A Advisor's mission is to recognize achievements, provide thought leadership, and connect professionals in mergers and acquisitions for the purpose of improving your deal-making craft and accelerating your deal flow. We are so glad you're joining us for this insightful and inspiring podcast conversation curated for mergers and acquisitions professionals. Whether you're an aspiring deal maker, a seasoned professional, or just curious about the world of mergers and acquisitions, you'll find something valuable and relevant in our podcast. Our goal is to bring you the best insights, stories, and tips from the experts who've been there and done that, so you can learn from their successes and mistakes and take your deal-making skills to the next level. But before we dive into today's episode, we have a small favor to ask you. If you enjoy listening to our podcast and find it useful, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and subscribing to our M&A Alerts newsletter. You can find the links in the description below. This will help us reach more people like you and grow our community of M&A professionals. It will also let us know that you appreciate our work and want us to keep producing more quality content for you. Plus, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always be in the loop with the latest trends in the M&A world to improve and accelerate your deal making. So please follow us. You are the reason we do what we do, and we couldn't do it without you. And now for today's podcast. Hey, Wilbur, welcome back. All right, well, let's go right to it, Wilbur. Okay, Wilbur brought a lot of markers here if you want to personalize he won't have to sign his name, but he'll sign your name if you want to personalize. And we'll have a photo opportunity. Okay, so last time we talked about how to become a U.S. Commerce Secretary. Can anybody in M&A get into and become U.S. Commerce Secretary? Have your views changed on that? Because I guess it was Howard Lutnick who just announced. I don't think he was an M&A, but he was a business leader.
Well, I've known Howard Lutnick for quite a long time, and he has a sort of remarkable history in Wall Street, in that it's his firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, that was way up high in the World Trade Center when 9/11 came. So the vast majority of his firm got wiped out by the terrorists, including his brother. His younger brother had been working. Howard that morning was taking one of his children to school, and that's the only reason he didn't get blown up. But then he had to rebuild it since they lost virtually everybody. And my understanding is for the first several years, they gave 25% of their profits to the widows of the people who were trapped in the World Trade Center thing. So that was a real act of generosity to be, in effect, starting from scratch again, and yet make provision for the people. And as you know, he's built Cantor into a very large business, initially mostly trading government securities. Now they trade everything, and they were one of the leaders in the SPAC movement, the underwriting of SPACs, and as well in the de-SPACing. So he's built a very good business, very international business. And so I think he'll do fine in commerce.
Well, we'll come back to SPACs because you actually had a SPAC, right?
We've had a couple of SPACs over the years. Lately, as you know, it's gotten very difficult because the market is very anti-SPAC and anti-de-SPACing. But
It became more of a promoter tool for early stage and startup companies, and that's really not an appropriate structure, the
right,
SPAC.
right. Well, we did a SPAC years ago in 2014, 15. We bought a very large chemical distribution business, and it merged over the years with a couple of others, and now it's the largest chemical distributor in this country. So it can be done, but that was a business that was already pretty substantial, and we bought it from TPG. TPG had been a private equity investor in it, and what they wanted was a partial liquefaction of their holding, and then they kept the rest in and gradually divested it over time. So it was a vehicle, in effect, for them to have a gradual exit from what had been a very successful investment for TPG.
Well, let's stay on SPACs. You said you had another SPAC. Did you have a successful de-SPACing with that one as well?
Yes. So, well, that one is a work in progress right now. But I think a SPAC is a perfectly valid form of activity, but it's just like high yield bonds or anything else. It can get overdone because Wall Street seems to have a knack. If there's demand developed for a product, it finds enough product at least to equal the demand and often to exceed the demand. And that's why we get these wild swings in market caps of things like SPAC.
Yeah, I was involved in a few SPACs as well, and it was good until it wasn't, right? So I think a lot of the investment bankers just overblown it. And again, as I said before, it became more of a promoter tool for early stage, non-cash flowing startup. I
Right.
mean, you need cash, and in the SPAC structure, they could vote for the deal, but then redeem their shares, and then you don't have any cash for the deal.
Right. Well, initially, the rationale for that had been that as a de-SPAC, you were permitted to put in forecasts into the offering material, whereas it's a little trickier to do that in a conventional IPO setting. But more recently, SEC imposed underwriters' liability on everybody, so that's not the big feature that it used to be. But that had been the theory why it was a better way for immature companies to go public, in that their whole rationale was the future because they didn't have very much history.
Let's move back into uh, deregulation because this is a major campaign promise of
Right.
President-elect Trump's second term. I know he tried to do some of it, or a lot of it actually, in the first term. Maybe you want to contrast what you accomplished in the first term, or what he accomplished in the first term, and what you did over at the Commerce Department as far as affecting that deregulation as well. I don't know how much FTC, SEC. Did you cover any of those? Is that under another branch? That's so complicated.
Sure. Well, toward the end of the first Trump administration, when business people would come to see me, generally the thing they were the most grateful for was deregulation. They liked the tax reductions and all that, and depending on the nature of the industry, they might or might not like the tariffs, but they all liked the deregulation. And what Trump did last time, and I'm absolutely certain he'll do again this time, is to require any cabinet department that wants to put in a new regulation has to find a multiple of old regulations of at least equal impact to cancel. So in the case of commerce, we actually canceled 8 times as many rules and regulations as the new ones that we put in. So the fact of how many regulations is one thing. But what's equally important when you have an administration like the outgoing one that encourages regulation, sometimes the people out in the field become super regulators and it gets a little bit abusive. We actually experienced that before I went into government. I don't want to say the exact name of the entity, but we had an operation. We were doing oil and gas drilling. And one day, the fellow from the company called me and he said, "You'll be amazed, but the local EPA now wants me to get a permit to put a porta potty out on a well site." Well, you know what a potty is. It's a toilet that's self-contained and liquid, so nothing even leaves the container. So I said, well, I can't imagine that there's any such regulation. Tell them to go to hell. And he said, that's fine, but then what will they do to me when I come around and I really do need a permit? So when you have an environment that's pro regulation as a concept, you get to these abusive activities. But none of that's going to happen under Trump at all. Um, I don't know what ratio he'll set for cancellations of regulations versus new ones, but I'm pretty sure that the first week or two that he's in office, there'll be a zillion executive orders because when Biden got in, he made a lot of executive orders that effectively countermanded things we had done. So I'm sure he will erase that and probably go a bit further, even in the very beginning. So the deregulation for sure will occur.
Why did Biden do that? I mean, yes, left, right, we hate Trump type of stuff, but a number of those regulations were common sense, at least on the face of it. Why did he just go in and wipe out all of the work that Trump did?
Well, I think the problem was the present administration tends to see everything through two prisms. One prism is the prism of race, and the other prism is the prism of sexuality or the lack thereof. And so they start from a whole different point of view. Trump's beginning prism will be business and will be strong position for U.S. internationally. So it's a whole different way of looking at things. And as a result, you will naturally expect a different outcome. I think, for example, the Biden administration has, I think, not done a very effective job of trying to regulate cryptocurrencies. I'm not personally a big crypto fan, but I just don't think they've taken the trouble to understand the industry and understand what's a sensible level of regulation for it. So it's kind of regulate first, think about it second. With Trump, it will be the reverse. It'll be think about it first and regulate it if necessary, only second.
So, commerce, you oversaw a lot of things. How do you think things will change or perhaps be simplified in the next Trump administration?
Well, it's actually very interesting. One of the few departments whose policies were left pretty much intact by the Biden administration was commerce. Gina Raimondo, my successor, and I think she is frankly the best cabinet secretary that the Biden administration has. Now, admittedly, I think that mainly because she continued my policies and even carried them a bit further. So I naturally think I have to applaud her for that. But so I think it will be a little less radical a shift commerce versus, say, EPA or some of the other departments.
Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are gonna have a new administrative department called Department of Government
Right.
Efficiency. Are they gonna, look over? Is commerce pretty? You have a lot of stuff
Oh,
there. A lot of
yeah. Well, I'm a great fan of Elon Musk. I must admit that to start with. And I frankly think his joining with Trump was very helpful in the election that we just had, particularly with young people, who many of whom really adore Musk, and I think perhaps rightly. But Musk, as usual, is going to hit the ground running. 3 weeks ago, he had one of his people call me and say, commerce, because of its nature, interacts with most of the other departments. So they asked me, make up a list of both the political appointees and the senior non-political in all the departments you had contact with, and put an A by the good ones and a B by the bad ones. And I'm sure he's doing the same with other people. So he intends to hit the ground very much running. And I think that's great because there is a lot of wastage. There is a lot of bureaucratic nonsense in government. But frankly, I don't think just cutting costs can get us to anything like a balanced budget. Um, I think the only way we will really deal effectively with the debt issue is by outgrowing it. Right now, you have an economy that's growing at 2 plus something a year, and you have a federal deficit running around 5% of GDP. Well, with those two sets of arithmetic, you're going to be stuck with more debt every year. So we need both to bring down the cost of government somewhat, and mostly we need to accelerate the growth of the economy so that you can overcome the current situation. And that's what we hope regulatory relief, tax relief, and tariff policy can help accomplish.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't talk about the efficiency side of government. They see government only as a cost and expense, and not necessarily an entity that actually provides value and services that only it can do, and efficiency creating more value. Do you see government, or whether Elon or Vivek can have government be creating more value to
Well, it's complex. For example, one of President Trump's very recent appointees is my very good friend Mehmet Oz to run the CMBS. That's a huge operation that basically deals with everything to do with healthcare, and that's an enormous part of the budget deficit. So I think you'll see a lot of very innovative activity there, and that isn't going to be so much elimination of people, but just reduction of costs. It costs, for example, the FDA is a very, very restrictive agency. It's very expensive to go through the various stages of getting a new drug approved. It's hundreds of millions of dollars to get it from start to finish. Well, one would hope that with AI, they could reduce the number of so called placebo subjects in an investigation. What they do now if you have a drug up for approval, you administer it to one half of the universe of population that you're putting in the study, and the other half you give a similar looking thing, but it has no medicinal impact. And then they compare the results of the two for safety and for efficacy over a period of time. Well, with AI, my guess is you can do it a lot more efficiently because it costs over $50,000 per person that you put into those trials. Well, if the average trial just for a phase one may be 200 or 250 people, take 200 or 250 times 50,000, you're getting to a grown-up number, and now you've only hit one level out of four or so they have to go through. And in fact, in Alzheimer's, for a while, the FDA was requiring that if you had a new Alzheimer product, you had to wait until the last person in your sample of people being tested died because they felt the only way you could be sure would be to deal with the cadaver. Well, that takes years, so it prolonged the time period before you could get to the next step and before you could have an effective drug. You don't have to wait for everybody to die to do the testing. So I think under the new administration, hopefully the cost of R&D will go down. And if it does, there's no reason the price of drugs won't come down. Because most pharmaceuticals, the actual cost of making the product is relatively small. The real cost is amortizing the hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes more, of research that went into developing the drug. So that's an example where it won't so much cut people out of government, but it can have a very, very major impact on one of our biggest spending parts.
Yeah, that's so AI. I think is we have a session or two later regarding M&A and AI. So I'd love we're excited to see what's to come with AI. That's a great example. Let's get talk. This is a M&A advisor event. Let's talk about how sort of the deregulation, perhaps the tariff policy of the next Trump administration is going to affect mergers and acquisitions. A number of people in this room are sort of focused on middle market, lower mid market M&A, sort of the everyday M&A transactions.
Sure.
So how should we navigate that? How what should we look forward to?
Well, I think the relief will probably be more important at the very large end of the spectrum. The current FTC chief seems never to have met a big company that she likes. And almost every big merger comes under at least scrutiny, if not actual attack. Trump administration will not start out with that kind of a bias. Doesn't mean that it will be the Wild West, but it's just the presumption won't be that big companies are bad and big companies need to be pursued and regulated very strictly. Smaller companies, I think the major impact could actually be a little bit negative in that I think they will be very tough on CFIUS, namely the rules about foreign acquisitions of American businesses. So I think that may get to be a bit of a trickier area, particularly relative to China. but even perhaps in less high-tech things. You might have seen I wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal fairly recently supporting the acquisition of U.S. Steel by Nippon Steel. And I did it for a couple reasons. U.S. is the largest recipient of foreign direct investment of any country in the world. And if we're not going to let a friendly country, a good ally like Japan, make a non-high-tech acquisition, who are we going to keep inviting in? So, and I think in the case, that particular case, U.S. Steel has a very weak balance sheet. Nippon has a very strong balance sheet. And in some kinds of steel technology, Nippon actually has more advanced technology than U.S. Steel does. So the worry about job insecurity, I think, was ill-placed. You're not going to move a steel mill anywhere, certainly not from U.S. to Japan. And I think it, frankly, would be better for the workers at U.S. Steel to be part of Nippon than their current thing. So now that the election is over, maybe a little more rationality can come into that sort of thing. But I do think this administration will be cautious about China-oriented acquisition.
I have one more question for Wilbur, but if anybody else has questions, please, we do have some time to do that. Please do ask. A number of people in M&A, private equity, business, think about running for office or getting involved in government. How would you propose people do that? How does somebody get a job in the Trump administration if anybody's interested?
Well, first of all, you probably should give yourself a sanity check to decide whether you really want to do it. But assuming you do, the way I got involved was a very curious way. As you know, distress companies were mainly what I did for most of my adult life. And the way I met President Trump was in 1990. He decided to build a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey, right on the boardwalk. And he got Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns to underwrite $800 million of mortgage bonds for the startup casino. Only problem is they never made one interest payment. There were big overruns in the construction cost, and they defaulted before they made a single payment. Well, that naturally upset the bondholders. Bonds that were trading then at 20 cents on the dollar. So the Thursday before Memorial Day weekend, they hired me to advise them and try to recoup their money. So when Trump heard the announcement, he said, "You got to come down to Atlantic City tomorrow and we'll start our discussion." Well, the last place in the world I wanted to be was Atlantic City on a big holiday weekend with tens of thousands of people playing slot machines. But anyhow, so I went down, got his helicopter from Manhattan down. We land on the boardwalk, and it's mobbed with people, and they're all clearly excited to see him there. He had already become a kind of a cult figure with middle class and lower middle class folks. Those were his gamblers for the most part. So we get into, he's waiting for me in a big stretch limo, and I noticed on the front bumper of the limo, there were two flags. One was a U.S. flag, and one was a Trump flag. And the Trump flag was a little bigger than the U.S. flag. So it was part of his gift for understatement of things. So we go around behind the casino, we get inside, and again, it's swarming. People having him sign their notepads, their beanie hats. One lady was in a bareback dress, and she actually had him sign her back. Now, why she wanted Donald J. Trump in magic marker on her back, I will never know, but that's what she wanted and what she got. So then we go upstairs, we start negotiating, and I got no place at all. He started it out by saying, as you know, the bonds are trading at 20 cents, and your holders will be lucky to come out of this with 20 cents. So instead of arguing a lot, why don't we just do this? I'll personally guarantee them the 20 cents, and then we don't have to have a big negotiation. Said, well, Donald, the problem is bondholders hired me to get them par plus accrued plus some equity in the casino. So we have a little value gap that we have to cover. Got no place. So finally, I said to him, well, Donald, is that where you are as of today? You're stuck at 20 cents. He said, yes. I said, well, then I'm not going to waste my time. And I walked out on him. And he was shocked because he was used to using that kind of heavy-handed tactic on the people he was negotiating with. So it was a little bit of jujitsu to use it on him. But to this day, he tells the story. He finds it amusing. So the months go by, we keep negotiating, and we're getting closer and closer to our objective. But finally, one day early in October, we were extremely close, but not quite there. So I went over to his office and said, Donald, we either have to make a deal today or we're going to put you in Chapter 11. He turned down that proposal. So I went back to my office, put out a press release saying the Trump Taj Mahal bondholders are going to have a very important press conference at the Marriott Marquis at 5 o'clock this afternoon. We picked the Marriott because it wasn't one of his properties. As soon as that came over the newswire, he called me, said, what the hell are you doing at the Marriott Marquis? What are you going to say to the press? I said, well, Donald, I told you, if we don't make a deal today, we'll see you in court. And we're going to announce that we're putting the Taj in an involuntary bankruptcy proceeding. So we negotiated some more. We finally got everything pretty well together. And then he said, but one more thing. And I had spent enough time with him that I knew when he said one more thing, it was usually a real zinger. Well, this time the one more thing was we had to move the press conference from the Marriott to the Plaza Hotel. And that was his last little twist that he needed. So we have the press conference, make all the big announcement, everything's lovey-dovey. Then I get in the car to be driven home, and you can imagine this was a pretty trying, pretty stressful day for me, so I was happy to get a little rest. But the phone rang. This is your mother. Oh, hi, Mom. Everything okay? No, everything is not okay. My friends and I have been playing mahjong while we were watching that disgraceful press conference you put on with Donald Trump. And we all think that after all those mean things he said about you, you should not have made a deal with him. But Mom, that's what I do. That's what people hire me to do. Well, if you had only become a lawyer like I always wanted you to, you wouldn't have to hang around with people like that. She hung up on me. So that was my family reward for what I thought was a pretty good day's work. But anyhow, out of that bankruptcy came me having a big respect for Trump and Carl Icahn as well. Carl had become, after the bonds collapsed, the biggest bondholder. So he and I were united in fighting with Trump. But after the bankruptcy, years later, when Trump announced he was running for president, both Carl and I were very early endorsers of him. And the reason was when you go toe to toe with someone for months, like we did with Trump, you pretty well get to know what they're made of. And we both felt and still feel that beneath the bravado, beneath all the personality aspects that you're very familiar with, there's a very serious, very well intentioned, very accomplished person. And that's why we both were early endorsers of his candidacy.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So that's how I became Treasury Secretary. Oh, sorry, Commerce.
Commerce Secretary. No, that's good. So I don't know if any of you have that kind of story with someone who's going to become president, but certainly if we do a sanity check and still want to work for government, now I think they are looking for very capable people.
Well, yeah, and M&A people are probably very well equipped to go into government and help fix it, in that you're used to complicated situations. If you've been dealing with distress, you could argue that the federal government is the largest distress company in the world. So there's a lot of carryover from private. But the whole system of things in government is very, very different. For one thing, people are very risk averse, people in government, the bureaucrats, because there's no reward for doing something innovative that works well. But if you innovate something and it doesn't work well, there's always an inspector general happy to tear you apart. There's always a congressional investigating committee happy to torture you on TV. So they become very, very cautious and very, very resistant to change. And that's something you have to get accustomed to and try to work around it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Any questions? Anybody have? Go ahead, Bobby.
Thank you, Mr. Test. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ross. Question on tariffs. How should companies be looking at the coming tariff storm?
How can companies look at the coming tariffs?
Yeah. Well, when we first went into office in 2016, the prevailing thinking among most businesses was globalization and internationalization of supply chains. I think people have subsequently, even independently of government, come to the conclusion that perhaps things went a little too far with that, in that making one part in one country, another part in another country, another part in the third one, and then perhaps assembling them for sale in a fourth country, it's complicated. It makes inventory issues, especially since most companies try to be on a just-in-time inventory purchasing policy. But it also creates, as we learned during COVID, creates points of vulnerability. So I think there's a general move toward instead locating your manufacturing facilities closer to the markets you're trying to serve. And that's going to be pushed by governments. Almost every government, and certainly every government in an advanced country like Europe, like Japan, like U.S. are all trying to deal with uh, trade imbalances. So I think there's no question that we're going into more of what people would call a protectionist period. And Trump feels very much that the tariffs we put on steel and aluminum and other products really help. And they not only help directly, maybe their bigger help was indirectly, because after the steel and aluminum ones, we started to work on automotive. And so I went over to Europe and I met with our ambassadors and with the heads of all the big European auto companies and said to them, look, we're not going to put up with as much import of automobiles as we've been having. So if you don't want big tariffs, you got to start making more parts here, having more of the value added here in the U.S. And because they saw that we had followed through on steel and aluminum, they made big concessions. And if you notice, there's a lot more percentage of auto being manufactured here now than there had been. And then that carried over to the USMCA, the replacement for NAFTA with Canada and Mexico. In that treaty, we actually specified that depending on the item, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the value had to be produced in the U.S. in order to avoid tariff. So I think you'll see a lot of negotiations that hopefully will make it unnecessary to put in too many tariffs, because the real purpose is to get more manufacturing here. The purpose isn't necessarily to end up with more tariffs. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy road until the other countries get used to what we're really trying to do and make concessions. But for sure, it's going to be intending to make manufacturing here more attractive to U.S. companies and to make manufacturing elsewhere less attractive.
We want to leave time for the books. If you want books are already pre-signed and a photo op right after this. I do want to thank Secretary Ross for having opening up our event. We will see you next time in Palm Beach.
Right.
Wilbur has graciously opened his home to just to our people, to not to all the live stream people, unless you come down to Palm Beach. Our opening cocktail. You've been a great friend of ours, of the M&A Advisor, and I'd like to thank you for today. Give him a hand.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'll be right outside and I'll be happy to personalize some books for you. So thank you for coming and thank you for being an attentive audience.
Hi, I'm Leanna Hawkins, and this is M&A TV. We are at the Future of Dealmaking Summit in New York City at the New York Athletic Club today, joined by Mr. Wilbur Ross, former U.S. Secretary of Commerce. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Yes, absolutely. So we are now in a new political environment, the next Trump administration. What are your thoughts post-election?
Well, I think it's been doing very well. It's making its decisions much more rapidly than he did last time. Last time, very little happened till after Thanksgiving. Now you have almost the whole cabinet already picked out.
Yes, and you were actually just mentioning on the stage earlier this morning your support of and your friendships with Elon Musk and Dr. Mehmet Oz and their involvement in the new administration. Give us some of your thoughts for the M&A TV audience on that.
Well, I think we do need some cost cutting. I think they'll be very good at that. But we also need other activities that enhance the economy, because to deal with the debt question, we have to grow our way out of it. And that means we need much more than 2% growth.
And so figures like that in the public that have support of, as you mentioned, the younger generations, that will help move things along, you think?
Oh, for sure. And I think they were very helpful in terms of the election.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are your economic expectations with the new administration for 2025 and beyond?
Very near term, it's harder to judge because you don't know how quickly Congress will pass the measures that he wants. But given that Republicans have a majority both in the House and the Senate, and given that he'll have his team in place quickly, I think you'll see an awful lot of new legislation, mostly being very pro-business.
Well, we've seen a very serious bull market already post-election. So yes, and we're hoping for that economic activity to continue. Also wanted to mention the launch of your new book, Risk and Returns, Creating Success in Business and Life. We appreciate you being here, signing some books for us, and we look forward to reading it and being a part of the next chapter of your career.
Well, thank you very much. Good to talk with you.
Thank you, Secretary.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new from it. If you have any questions or comments for us or any of our guests, please feel free to leave them in the podcast platform of your choice or send us an email at editor@maadvisor.com. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback. And if you haven't done so already, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and subscribe to our M&A Alerts newsletter at the links in the description or on our website at www.maadvisor.com. This will help you stay updated on the latest M&A interviews and trends and support our podcast to grow and reach more listeners like you. This is Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and founder of the M&A Advisor. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our M&A Advisor community. Until next time, stay safe and happy dealing.